All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. As I said at the top of the show, one of several big stories that broke all in a row today. It's kind of a pretty amazing day. An effort, a FOIA lawsuit fought by a very important transparency group, one of my favorite watchdogs, OpenTheBooks.com, forced out into public all of the royalties that NIH scientists have been collecting over the last 2 decades for experiments, for technologies, for drugs that you, the American taxpayer, paid for. So you paid for them, you took the risk, and then the researchers who already get a salary from the United States government, people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, Dr. Francis Collins, they get the royalties. I know that makes you feel uncomfortable. The scope of this is extraordinary. Let's just take the top 2 guys from the pandemic, Tony Fauci, Francis Collins, 58 royalty payments over the last decade and a half. So they're getting some stuff. And total, all NIH scientists, you ready for this? For all inventions, medical inventions, drugs, more than $325 million, 56,000 payments in royalties to these scientists for work that you paid for. Well, joining me right now, the man behind Open the Books, and I think one of the great fighters for transparency in America, Adam Indrzeski, joins us right now. Good to have you back on the show, my friend.
Well, John, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
You have done great work. This was like a dental extraction exercise, right? You got the first round of documents. They were so blacked out, they were useless. You kept fighting. You worked with Judicial Watch. Ultimately, you're getting the American people to see, hey, these are our employees. They work for the United States government, and they're making money off of inventions that taxpayers paid for. How important was it to get the size and scope of these royalties to the American public?
So I think during the pandemic, John, the American people started to feel that big government was very close to big pharma. And this is a database that shows you empirically just how close they are. And obviously, we were inspired by your work back in 2004 and 2005 with the Associated Press when you broke this database open for the first time back then, and you were able to follow the money. You filed a Federal Freedom of Information Act request, and they gave you the entire database, and you found scandal. You found that Dr. Anthony Fauci had collected $45,000 worth of royalties from 1997 through 2004 for an AIDS therapeutic that he invented with his deputy at his institute, Clifford Lane, and that they had also put in, through their institute, $36 million of taxpayer money to enhance that invention and get it tested. And so when this was discovered, it was a scandal. Fauci had burnt down all the firewalls within his own institute, and it was on its face conflict of interest. And that's when Fauci said, quote unquote, I will donate my royalties to charity. Of course, he provided no proof over the years.
Yeah. And there's been an effort to make this information harder and harder and harder to get, sweep it under the rug. There is a mindset that you see at the National Institutes of Health that these are their work, that we're scientists and this, we are the science, you're not, and you're not entitled to see it. You can't handle the truth, so we're not going to let you see it. And that's been on everything from the COVID origins, potentially emanating from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, to which royalties the scientists get for inventions that, we all paid for. Is there any progress that you've seen beyond the courts forcing this disclosure where NIH realizes we have an obligation to more transparency than we've given the American public?
No. NIH has done everything they possibly could to stop us from making this information public, John. It's been a fierce battle. Over the course of the last 2 years, a knockdown, drag-out dogfight to open the books on these third-party royalties. And we're making real progress. So here's the timeline. And we filed our Federal Freedom of Information Act request in September of 2021. So it's almost been 2 years. The agency ignored it. And then we sued them immediately with our lawyers, Judicial Watch, the Washington, D.C.-based public interest law firm. They've been absolutely terrific. We quickly won that FOIA case. And by February of 2022, NIH said that they would produce the line-by-line royalties all the way back to the year 2009. But they slow-walked the production. Over the course of 10 months, they produced 3,000 pages of these line-by-line royalties. But they blacked it out so significantly that if we didn't employ forensic data scientists, the production would be worthless. Here's what they blacked out. They blacked out the name of the company who paid the royalty. They blacked out the amount paid to the individual scientist and by the company itself. And they blacked out the license number and patent number, the invention. So we didn't know the amount the individual scientists were receiving. We could see their names. We didn't know who paid the royalty, and we didn't know what the invention was. These are government-paid, taxpayer-paid scientists and government taxpayer-paid labs inventing things, licensing them to the private sector, and NIH wanted to throw a blanket over the entire complex.
Yeah, it's amazing. The secret insistence of this agency has always mystified me, going all the way back 2 decades ago when I did the original work for AP on things like conducting research, AIDS drug research on foster children in New York, children who didn't have full-time parents. They couldn't wait to throw the blanket over that as well. There is, I think, a very important legal issue that stems from this, which is, I think it was a year ago, Anthony Fauci was asked by Senator Rand Paul, did you ever get any royalties from an entity that received NIAID money? And he said, I doubt it. That's what Fauci said. He doubted it. But there is some real serious questions of whether that's true, because there are 37 payments, right? You've got some from Santa Cruz Biotechnology. You've got some from Ansel Corp. You've got some from Chiron Corp. Now, Chiron Corp, now owned by Novartis, was a contractor for NIAID back in 2004 when they were helping to develop an avian bird flu influenza vaccine. There's going to be, I suspect, some interest in members of Congress about whether Tony Fauci gave them an honest answer. What's your assessment of what you found in the Fauci royalties alone, and whether they call into question his earlier testimony?
So I think Fauci, in 2 aspects, at best, misled U.S. Senator Rand Paul twice in those U.S. Senate hearings last year. So number one, Fauci misled Senator Paul and the Senate and the American people writ large on the fact that they didn't have to disclose who paid them their royalties. Last week, we won a big victory when the National Institutes of Health, they amended their Freedom of Information Act production because of our lawsuit, and they gave us the company names. So for the first time, we know that there's 2,019 companies, and we can tie out each company to a scientist. So we know the companies now, today, that were paying Dr. Anthony Fauci. And you're exactly right. When Fauci said he doubted whether or not one of his royalty-paying companies, whether or not he was regulating them or grant-making to them, there's real question on that. We tie that out in the piece today at our OpenTheBooks.substack piece, or you can go to OpenTheBooks.com and read it, because he was actually contracting with his royalty payers at Chiron, who eventually becomes Novartis, as you mentioned. He had greenlit avian bird flu vaccine contracts with them. So that is the second way that Fauci misled Congress.
Wow. These are big things. And it follows a pattern, because there's obviously questions about Fauci and his testimony about COVID-19, the origins. This one fits into that another category. Now, there is an interesting twist that the New York Post and others have found today. There seems to be one of the royalty payers involves a lab in China right near the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I think it's called the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products, right? And that they paid a licensing fee to some of the NIH folks. Why is this important, given what we now know about COVID-19 and the possibility of a lab leak in Wuhan at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which apparently is a sister organization to this other institute that was paying royalties to the NIH?
So our auditors at OpenTheBooks.com, we were able to tie out the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products with 64 payments. So they licensed this Chinese CCP state-owned company, had licensed the medical inventions from NIH, developed at U.S. taxpayer expense, and was paying NIH royalties. And they were paying royalties basically to the C-suite. So over at Fauci's institute, there was a guy, Robert Chinook, and his successor, Jeffrey Cohen.
Yeah, Dr. Chinook, I think, died, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, he died recently, yeah.
And they were director of the lab over at NIAID, the infectious diseases lab, and this CCP-owned company was paying those scientists royalties from their inventions. And also, we were able to tie out that Douglas Lowy, 3 times since 2015, he's been the acting director of the National Cancer Institute. And they cut him a royalty check as well. So you're talking 3 C-suite level guys at NIH in 2 different institutes, where this Chinese CCP-owned state-owned company, who is very close and collaborated with the Wuhan Institute of Virology and is actually situated as neighbors to them back in China, they were dialed in at the highest levels at NIH.
Yeah. Well, we've asked for some comment from NIH today. There's been crickets, but we're going to keep pursuing it. Greg Piper, our great reporter, who's worked a lot on Fauci and NIH and conflicts of interest, going to stay on top of this, Adam. You do such amazing work. And of course, I've been affiliated and writing stuff off of Open the Books for many, many years. But if someone's listening for the first time, tell us a little bit about the mission of Open the Books. And obviously its success is transparency, but its mission and also how people can connect through your Substack, through your social media, through the website.
So at OpenTheBooks.com, we believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. So like, for instance, this database of third-party royalties, this is a perfect example of why we exist. We don't trust public officials, even when they go in front of Congress and say something. We look at the documents and the hard facts. And so just specific to this third-party royalty issue, you can come to our website. We're opening up the entire database. You can download an Excel database, and you yourself can slice it and dice it and see what you see in that database. And that's where news media is getting their own stories right from the work that we've done to post this information on our website. Now, John, as you know, last year we filed 55,000 Freedom of Information Act requests.
That's amazing.
It was the most in American history. And we captured nearly every dime taxed and spent at the local, state, and federal level, and we display it on our website for everybody to parse through.
That is an extraordinary public service, and because it gets harder and harder to access, particularly spending records. They come in different formats. They often are disjointed. You make them so accessible, so easy to do it. And it's interesting, not only do journalists like myself get the benefit, but a lot of public policymakers now turn to your organization to do research and to make good policy decisions based on how past money was spent. And I think that is such an extraordinary opportunity for people to benefit. This is a gift that gives every day. You post it once, it might get used thousands of times after that as people try to understand how their government is working and how their tax dollars are spent. Adam, it's always an honor. This was a very big story. We're going to be digging into this data for weeks because it's such a rich data set. But I want to thank you for the fight to get this information public, because I know it wasn't easy. I know it's not inexpensive, but the level of transparency it created for us today is a great victory for the American people. I want to thank you for doing that and also for helping make sense of it on the show today.
Well, and thank you, John, for your fight to open up these third-party royalties. It was an inspiration. We would not have filed our request but for seeing your work in 2005. So thank you for setting the pace and setting the example.
That's great to hear, and it's such a good thing. Americans benefit every time we can get them just a few more shreds of facts about how their government works, and this one gives us a big staple of new information to dig in. I suspect the policymakers will be combing through this and perhaps even coming up with some reform legislation. So bravo, great work. We'll get you on real soon because you're always doing great work, Adam.
Hey, sounds great, John. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Great honor.